What can I say about Solomon? Solomon is great fun. Really, these narratives here in First Kings, the first 11 chapters of First Kings, are really at the high point of the Deuteronomistic history. They are, in these chapters, we find the fulfillment not only of the Deuteronomistic history, but much of the covenant promises that are made in the Old Testament. And so this shows that the Deuteronomistic historian was not only familiar with the theology of Deuteronomy, but also with some of the discussion and theology of the covenant that we find even in the narrative of the Yahwist, right? For example, if you look at 4:20 through 22, it's fascinating. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Well, what promise is that fulfilling? Well, the promise that was made to Abraham, right? Way back at the beginning of Genesis. So there seems to be an echo, an ability for Deuteronomists to know that theology, and that Solomon was sovereign over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines, even to the borders of Egypt. They brought tribute and even served Solomon all the days of his life. The extension of that boundary is the same that we find given in the Genesis account. Again, in those borders of the creation account and the Yahwistic creation account, and then again the promises made to Abraham. So there is a parallel here, which you can see. Now, I'm not sure he was that extensive, but the blessing that is upon Solomon. And remember, the blessing that was given to Abraham was threefold. It was the numerous people, it was the extent of the land, and then that you will be a blessing upon, there will be a blessing upon you and upon all the earth. Well, Solomon is viewed by the Deuteronomist as the potential blessing upon the whole world, because the people from all over come, and they have peace with him. They come from all over to hear his wisdom and to be aware of him. So he's a fulfillment of this Old Testament covenant making. Now, Solomon is not as interesting a character as David was. He doesn't have the court intrigue. He doesn't have sort of the shiftiness and craftiness that David did with the account of David and Bathsheba, for example. He doesn't have the court intrigue in Saul's account. He is basically, except for one little minor thing, basically an ideal character, really. He is the second son of David and Bathsheba. Of course, their first son was taken from them because of their sin, right? But he's the second son of David, and he gained support from David through court intrigue of Nathan, the prophet, and his mother Bathsheba. And here we're finding Bathsheba's character in the very beginning to be very complex and developed, because in the account of David and Bathsheba in 2 Samuel, she seems like she hardly has a voice at all in the proceedings. Here she seems to be really emerging as a power player and inserting. Solomon was not the only son of David, right? And so inserting him in the discussion of the court and helping him to eliminate the political enemies of David. He carries out David's unfinished business. It's like, a lot of these stories remind me of mobster stories. It's like, okay, when the next generation comes, the one who the godfather was too weak to get, the son comes in and whacks them, gets them all whacked. Like Michael Corleone, he came in and had all of his father's enemies, whacked and destroyed while he takes his power. He's also very crafty in making these marriage alliances. He makes a marriage alliance with Pharaoh and with kings all over. And this is how you did it in the ancient world. It's not a sexual thing necessarily. It's a protection thing. If you make a marriage alliance with the great king, you've got protection, right? Because their daughter is in your court, or your daughter is in their court, so you're not going to attack them. And in fact, sometimes maybe the king might be your brother, but you'd send your daughter down to marry him, so that you can have trust, right? We see this even in the pharaohs of Israel. So this was just part of the ancient Near East. to make these marriage alignments and alliances, and what would result out of this would be these large courts, right? Of course. The other alliance that he makes is with Hiram, king of Tyre, up to the north, right, in Lebanon. That's very useful for trade, right? Because the Lebanese had, great natural harbors. They had lots of cedar, and then became the seafarers of the Mediterranean. So Hiram would have been a very important, significant person to have close alliances with, particularly as Solomon engages in building projects. The big characteristic for Solomon, I said he was an idealistic character, or ideal character, is his wisdom. He prays to God for wisdom, and we see him then acting in wisdom. You have the story of the two women, the two prostitutes who come to him, and they can't decide. They both had babies at the same time. They can't decide, which one of the baby dies, and so they have to decide whose baby is it. And Solomon says, "Well, cut the baby in half," right? You know that story. And who cries out? Well, the mother cries out, "Oh, no, please let her have it. Don't cut it in half." And then he realizes, oh, that's the mother, and he gives it to her. Whether it was whether she really was the blood mother or not, she was the mother of the child because she cared more for the child than for her own, right? So it's a wise decision. That's Solomon's wisdom, and we'll talk about wisdom here when we get to it. But wisdom is universal. It's something that was shared in the ancient Near East. It was a tradition, a court tradition. That was shared. So by depicting Solomon as a wise king, this is really a demonstration that Solomon is participating internationally in the court traditions of his time. So that he, because wisdom was something that was developed by the court scribes and others, and it was shared across the various kingdoms. And so to attribute Solomon as a composer of Proverbs and a few Psalms. David is usually given most credit for the Psalms, but to be given that credit shows that he has this ability to rule. He has this ability to do things. This is portraying him as not just someone in the backwater, but that Israel's king is educated. He's participating in a system of education that was international at that time. Now, what's significant for the Deuteronomists is that the Lord appears to Solomon both in his prayer as well as in the temple, and so this building of the temple is also a fulfillment of the Exodus accounts to a certain degree, right? He's finally bringing the ark home. He's finally building a tabernacle that will last, and he's allowed to do this. This is the high point of the Deuteronomist. Solomon's piety and his closeness with Yahweh, and the ability to build that tremendous temple. And the video, I think, is fascinating about Solomon's temple and to learn more about that. Now, in terms of Solomon's power, again, during his rule of the combined kingdom, these were the most extensive boundaries for Israel. And he builds numerous buildings and walls and fortified cities. As you can read in 420, he has a huge court. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores of choice flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen and 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Chipsah to Gaza, over all the kings west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all sides. And then it goes about how each of the different regions has to bring him food and taking care of it. It's tremendous. Incredible opulence. Gold, cedar, bronze, horses, chariots, silver, thousands of sacrifices, and his wisdom is renowned throughout the ancient Near East. So this is the high point of the Deuteronomistic history here. It really doesn't get any better than Solomon's rule. From here on out, it's all downhill. But this is Solomon's sin. It's not such a sin. It does turn, right? Solomon's sin is not that he has a large harem. In fact, that's something that the Deuteronomist seems to praise him for, right? He's engaged in the ancient Near Eastern courtly ways, and he seems to be engaged in that. Where he goes astray, according to Deuteronomist, is not that he has a large harem, but that he worships their gods at the high places. That's where he's faulted. That's the downfall not only of Solomon, but of his kingdom. Because enemies rise up against him, and Yahweh allows this to happen. And Jeroboam finally revolts against him, and according to the prophet Ahijah, tears his garment into pieces or whatever. But he's given 10 tribes, and Solomon's kingdom, Rehoboam, receives only 1, Judah. So you have this split as a result of Solomon's apostasy. So the Deuteronomistic circle, again, it keeps moving. It keeps moving around. While Solomon is clearly at the high point of the circle, he too sins. And again, this cycle is going to continue in each generation. The Deuteronomist will then now go through the rest of 1st and 2nd Kings, and he'll make judgments for each one of these kings, whether in the south, who are going to be the descendants of Solomon, or in the north, who are going to be, the dynasty will change multiple times, but the northern kings, and the northern kings generally will fall under disfavor by Deuteronomists. The southern kingdoms, many of them are viewed favorably, although a number of them are also viewed unfavorably. But the cycle continues again. Even Solomon has his faults. All right. Well, I hope you've gotten a bit of a sense for this great story about Solomon. I hope you enjoy reading these first 11 chapters of 1 Kings.